Hello grade 9, today I'm going to do a quick demonstration to help you understand the different tests for positive ions. If you look at the board right now, you'll see that I've done one test already. We had a solution containing iron 2+ ions, and when I added sodium hydroxide to that solution, a green precipitate formed. Now if I add extra sodium hydroxide to it, there will be no change. The green precipitate will stay where it is. I can also take some of that solution and add ammonia to it, and again I get a green precipitate. And if I add excess ammonia, again there's no change. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to go through and actually show you the test being performed for these 5 different metal ions, and then after that I'll do another test to show you for ammonium ions. In this beaker I have iron 3 chloride. Iron 3 chloride solution contains the iron 3+ ion. You'll notice that it is a brown solution. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of this solution, I'm going to put it into a test tube. Now, what we will see when I add a little bit of sodium hydroxide to this solution, we should see a brown-red precipitate form. Okay? And if I add extra sodium hydroxide, we notice that we don't lose that precipitate, it doesn't dissolve, but it remains in the test tube. If I take a little bit more of this iron 3 chloride, and I add to it ammonia, again we get this red-brown precipitate forming, and again if I add excess, there's no change. That is a positive test for iron 3 ions. They should form a red-brown precipitate when you add both sodium hydroxide and ammonia to them. Now I'm going to do the same test, this time doing copper 2+ ion. So I have copper 2 chloride. Going to add a small amount of the copper 2 chloride to my test tube. Add a little bit more so it can be picked up on camera a little bit better. Again, if I add a little bit of sodium hydroxide solution, I will get this blue precipitate. And if I add more sodium hydroxide to it, there's no change. We still have a blue precipitate, it doesn't disappear. If I take the copper 2 chloride solution this time, and I add a little bit of ammonia solution to it, again we see a greeny blue precipitate forming, but when I add excess ammonia to it, that precipitate actually dissolves and we get a clear dark blue solution. Now those first 3 ions on the board were coloured solutions to start with, and it's very easy to tell what ions you have by the colour that you get. However, in the last 3 examples on the board, all of them are colourless solutions. The ions themselves usually form white precipitates, and so it's not so easy to determine what ion you have in solution. For example, I have zinc chloride, has zinc ions in solution. I'll run the same test that I did before. Again, I'll add a little bit of sodium hydroxide to my solution. When I do that, we see a white precipitate forming. If I add excess sodium hydroxide, give it a good mix, that white precipitate will start to redissolve again. Just need to give it a very good mix. And you can see that the precipitate, although there's a little bit there, is starting to redissolve when extra sodium hydroxide is added. When we test it using ammonia, we add a little bit of ammonia. Again, we get a white precipitate. Adding excess ammonia, give it a good mix, and our white precipitate dissolves again. Calcium ions in calcium chloride solution. Add a little bit of sodium hydroxide. We see a white precipitate. Add excess sodium hydroxide. We don't see any change. Okay? The white precipitate doesn't redissolve. Different to the zinc. And that's one of the ways that you can tell whether you have zinc ions or calcium ions. Testing it with ammonia. When we add ammonia to it, we don't see any precipitate forming at all, regardless of how much we add. And the last one of the metal ions is aluminium. We have aluminium ions, we have aluminium chloride here. Adding our sodium hydroxide a little bit, we get a white precipitate. Again, when I add excess, that white precipitate redissolves. Testing it with ammonia. We add a little bit of ammonia, we get a white precipitate. If I add excess ammonia, there's no change. It stays as a white precipitate. Okay, so those are the first 6 tests for 6 different metal ions. We can see that when we add a small amount of sodium hydroxide to each, we get a precipitate forming. In the case of iron 2+ and iron 3+ ions and copper 2+ ions, we get a coloured precipitate, and we can tell which one we have by the colour of the precipitate. However, in the case of the zinc, calcium and aluminium ions, they are all white precipitates, and we really have to look at the other parts of the test to determine which one we have. When we add excess sodium hydroxide, if we see no change, then we know that we have calcium, but not zinc or aluminium. When we add ammonia to the zinc, calcium or aluminium solutions, we see that we only get a white precipitate for the zinc and the aluminium. And if we add excess ammonia, we will see that the white precipitate will redissolve with its zinc, but it will not redissolve with its aluminium. The last test that I want to do for you now is just to show you how you test for ammonium ions. Now, ammonium NH4+ ions, I have some ammonium chloride solution here. It's a little bit of a slightly different test. What I need to do to my ammonium solution is I need to add a little bit of sodium hydroxide to it at the start. You won't see any precipitate or anything forming. I'll just add a little bit more. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that solution and I'm going to heat it up carefully, hopefully. Now what's going to happen is as I heat this up, it's going to produce ammonia gas, and that ammonia gas should turn the red litmus paper blue. just give it a little bit of time to generate the ammonia. And if you focus in on the paper a little bit, you can see that it's starting to turn blue, and that's a positive indication that the gas that is coming out of the solution is ammonia, and that's a positive test for the ammonium ion. Okay, so one of the things you're going to have to do in IGCSE is you're going to have to be able to look at some results for tests done on solutions, and you have to be able to determine what sort of positive ions they have. This is based on your work in chapter 19.4 on page 280 of your textbook. So hopefully by watching this video it should help you to be able to answer the questions in that section, but also to do any exam questions that involve doing these tests. Thank you.